Good. Welcome everybody to Finbrit social event. We have a guest, Antero Olakivi here, and he will guide us through very interesting and topical research of his in any moment. Just a few words about Finbrit. We offer language training, language testing, and social events, and we do this so that we can make Helsinki and Finland overall more inclusive, diverse, and also one of our values is lifelong learning. So we'll be learning new things with you, Antero, tonight, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. And hopefully I will be learning new things here today as well, since this is very preliminary. This is a study that is very much in progress, and I will be really pleased to hear your comments or questions about it anytime here or online. Anytime you feel you want to ask something or make a comment, don't hesitate to do so. So good afternoon on my behalf as well. I'm Antero Olakivi. I'm a researcher at the University of Helsinki in the Center of Excellence in Research on Aging and Care. Some words about the Center of Excellence first. It's a research center that is funded by the Academy of Finland. The Academy of Finland has funded it for eight consecutive years. It's quite a large research investment. I'm getting some alert, but maybe it doesn't bother anyone else, hopefully. This is a relatively large investment from the Academy of Finland to study issues related to aging and care. We are working in 3 universities, in the University of Jyväskylä, in Tampere University and University of Helsinki, and we have over 40 researchers in these universities doing research mainly from a social scientific perspective. So you could study issues related to aging and care also from psychological or health or medical perspective, but our focus in this center is on social scientific issues. We are mainly from disciplines such as social policy and gerontology and social gerontology and sociology, and we are studying themes and topics such as social and care politics and policies and inequalities related to aging and older age, public services for older adults and their accessibility. We are studying informal networks of support and care, professional and formal care work, also issues related to housing and independent living, also issues related to the adoption of new technologies, and then issues related to transnational migration. And this is the topic that our research group in the University of Helsinki is specializing to. No, I'm not able to. Sorry. Here we go. So this is a picture of our research group in Helsinki. So we have altogether 4 research groups, and one of them is located in Helsinki, and in Helsinki we are concentrating on issues related to migration, care and aging. So why is it important to study migration, care and aging? Well, we all know that populations are aging in basically all societies. And also migrant background populations are aging. Finland has one of the fastest growing populations of older migrants, and also what some people call future older migrants. So people who are still, for instance, in the working life, or working age, but will become retired in future and in the near future, and will perhaps at some point of time need services that are targeted for older people and so on. So this is an issue that will become more and more important, and there is very little research thus far on these topics. And also political discussions tend to ignore issues related to aging when it comes to migration. For instance, if you think about integration policies in Finland, they typically target younger people and working age people, and one of the main goals in integration policies in Finland has been to integrate people in the working life and in employment. So the question of what are the Finnish policies that are targeting and trying to improve the well-being, for instance, and social participation and inclusion of older migrants or older people with foreign backgrounds, then it's already more difficult to answer that question. And obviously there is a risk that we are going to see new forms of inequality, also discrimination, exclusion in society and in social and health services. So it's important to ask how we can make Finland more inclusive to everyone, regardless of age and gender and language and cultural background and race and religion and sexual orientation and so on. And this is what we are. These are questions that we hope that our research will be able to help answering in future. Also, in addition to issues that are related to discrimination and exclusion, there are really interesting and important issues that are related to new forms of transnational support networks and transnational families and transnational family configurations, for instance. And there is a need to better understand how people live their lives when they may be attached to different countries and different places simultaneously, and when families are more dispersed transnationally, in the sense that family members are living in different countries. So these are the issues that we are targeting in the Center of Excellence, and this talk today is a very kind of, I don't want to say that it's, I think it's important part, but still it's a very little part of the research that we are doing. So and I will give you some links through which you can follow our research in future, also beyond what I'm talking about today. And this is a good opportunity also to thank Finbrit for being really helpful in disseminating and circulating information about what we are doing and our research, and that has helped us a lot. So thank you, Finbrit. So to the topic of today. Well, to start from a bit take a step back to the time before Corona and COVID pandemic, I was actually doing a very different study in the autumn 2019, and I was interviewing people and persons with aged 60 to 80 who are foreign born and live permanently in Finland, and it was like obviously was not related to COVID at all until actually exactly a year ago, the 29th of January 2020, there was the first COVID case was diagnosed in Finland. At that time, I don't know how much people were concerned about that, but during the spring, it became clear that this pandemic is going to change our everyday lives so dramatically that we are kind of obligated to do some research on this and kind of stop the research that we were doing and take a break with it and start collecting new data that would be related to COVID-19. So what we did in April 2020 was that we launched 2 calls for stories. The first call wanted to collect stories from English-speaking persons with foreign background who are living in Finland and who have family members who are aged 65 or over, who are living in some other country. So those issues related to transnational families that I mentioned a minute ago. And the second call for stories targeted respondents who would be English-speaking persons who have foreign backgrounds and who are living in Finland and who are themselves aged 65 or over. And we also made similar 2 calls for stories in Belgium. One of our researchers in the Center of Excellence is located in Belgium, so we wanted to also collect stories from foreign-born people who would be living in Belgium and have their family members living in some other countries, or people who would be themselves older people living in Belgium with a foreign background. So what we are trying to look at with these stories, I will tell a bit more about the stories and the materials we collected in a minute. But the research questions that we are addressing here relate to, well, first the different ways that the respondents make sense of their experiences during the first peak of the pandemic and the lockdown, or the lockdown in Belgium, or the so-called semi-lockdown in Finland, where people were not forced to stay at home by law, but strongly encouraged to self-isolate. Besides wanting to study how people made sense of their experiences and experienced these situations, we also want to kind of study you could say the moral or moral climates and the moral evaluations that people have made about the situations. By this we mean that when people tell about their lives, like write stories about their lives, and when we do that, we are not only describing our lives or the events, but we are also evaluating those actions and events and emotions that we have experienced. For instance, some of the events that have taken place in our lives may be somehow shameful to us, and some of them might be more respectful and have more carry more dignity and so on. For instance, some of us may have committed what people nowadays call corona sin during the past year, and maybe met other people when we are not supposed to do that, and that might be a thing that we might be a little bit shameful sometimes, and we might need to explain why we have done that. And also then there might be things that we might find respectful in our actions. For instance, if we have been really able to manage through the self-isolation, and if we have followed the rules and so on, then that might be something that when we tell about it, then it might be like carry some respect and dignity to those stories that we tell. So what we want to study here is not only how people have lived through their lives during the corona, but during the spring peak of Corona, but also how people evaluate these events. And also these stories are a good way to examine how people perhaps sometimes explain their actions or emotions, especially when these actions and emotions, if they are somehow deviate from the social norms. For instance, if the norm is that you should not meet anyone and then you still do so, then these stories are a good opportunity to people, for instance, explain why they have acted the way they have. So these are the kind of issues that we want to study here. What have the social norms been, and how do people make sense of those norms, and how do they explain to themselves and also others if they have not followed the social norms or rules. And then what do these stories, when we analyze them from this perspective, what do they tell about the Finnish society or also the Belgian society about aging and transnational lives, family lives during spring 2020. So I will first walk us through the sub-study that is about people living either in Finland or in Belgium who have older family members who are living in other countries. So in the call, when we launched it, we told people that we would like to hear how they have felt, how they have felt to care for a family member who is living in another country or across a national border in the situation, what kind of practical problems people may have found, and how people have perhaps solved the practical problems that they have found. Also, whether their family members have needed help during the virus outbreak, and if they have received such help. And also whether the older relatives of the respondents have, or whether the respondents themselves have been able to help or support the older family members, whether they would have liked to do some more, help more, or whether the feelings of the needs for help might have felt overwhelming for the respondents. And also whether they think that the family members who live abroad will get help in future if they will need that, and from whom they would get that help, and also who do these respondents think that should be helping the older family members. So we received altogether 41 responses, 32 from women, 9 from men. I think this reflects perhaps this gender division here perhaps reflects the kind of gendered norms related to care and caring. And when we ask people to write about caring for a family member, then it may be that this call has attracted more women respondents who have felt that who have felt the need to write about these issues. We have responses from many countries, 7 from the UK, then from France and US, and also many other countries. Maybe I should note here that we kind of told in the call for stories that we would like to get stories from English speakers, but we didn't say that people need to necessarily be had to have English as their first language. So we don't know whether these are all English speakers by their first language, but they have all been identifying at least with the word English speakers. And also 20 respondents from Finland, who are the respondents who have been living in Belgium during last spring. then some of the first observations that was really easy to make reading these stories that we received was that many, or I should perhaps say that most of the respondents were writing about the sense of their personal responsibility in relation to their older family members who are living in other countries. I have some extracts from the stories. Normally I would let you read them yourself, but since I think that the font might be somewhat small, I will also read them out today. So the first story from a man living in Finland. The coronavirus pandemic has caused a great deal of concern for my parents, which are above 65 years old, and the distance has made it a terrible existential experience for me, questioning whether I should even stay in Finland for the future. And the second extract from a story of a woman born in Latin America and also living in Finland. I have removed some details here to protect the anonymity of these respondents, but this respondent is 30 to 39 years old. And she's from Latin America, living in Finland since 2015. Family living in my home country, mother 75 years old and father 80 years old. I am an only child. Topic that mattered to me most, feeling of guilty for not being in my home country to help my parents. So some of my first thoughts from seeing these stories was that, like I said, almost all of the respondents express feelings of being concerned for their older relatives, mostly parents or grandparents, feelings of being worried, stressed out, sad because of the situation. And not only because they would be worried that their family members would get COVID, but because simply the travel restrictions and simply the inability to be there if something happens, if there is some other need for help that is perhaps not related to COVID at all, but the COVID situation would make it impossible to travel, then this is a thing that can evidently and did evidently create a lot of concern in our respondents, which is of course very easy to understand. But also people were not only concerned, but they also often expressed kind of deep personal responsibility over the situation. So they were kind of seeing themselves, I would say that they were seeing themselves as people who have in their lives made the choice of traveling to other country, and when they have made the choice, the personal choice, they kind of were writing as if they kind of need to also carry the responsibility of making that choice. So that it was not only that this is the situation that I'm living in another country and I can't do anything for it, anything about it, but people were also writing about, like in those previous extracts, like about whether they should like rethink living in Finland, or whether, and also feelings of guilty for being in Finland. So if you haven't made the personal choice of going somewhere in another country, then you probably wouldn't feel guilty for doing that. But these people seem to kind of see themselves as belonging to a group of what someone might call voluntary migrants, who are not forced to live in another country, but who have made that choice themselves and therefore need to kind of carry that personal responsibility, which is one might also say that maybe that is one way that is the way that these people look at themselves in these narratives. But obviously, the reasons for people to migrate are in real life often a lot more complex, and I would assume that these people who write about themselves as people who have made their own choice to migrate to Finland still have had many reasons, like having a job or needing to get education in somewhere, or many other reasons, family reasons, having a spouse living in Finland and so on. But still, even though they might have many reasons for living in another country, they seem to write about the situation as if they would have made the kind of a personal choice that potentially can kind of violate against some norms related to being close to your parents, or taking care of your parents, or grandparents or other relatives. This topic of personal responsibility was really strong in the stories, but that doesn't mean that people wouldn't have mentioned also, in addition to themselves, also other actors who have some responsibilities in the situation. Here's a story from a woman again living in Finland, born in UK. My parents live in England. They are age 65. My father, who has a medical condition, is in a higher risk group because of this medical condition. When the outbreak started, my father was not believing it was a serious problem. This was something that was supported by the slow response of the UK government to lock down the country. I think the reports and news reports coming from Italy and myself and my sister, telling them they need to take precautions and not go outside unless necessarily, is when they started to take it seriously. I have felt very worried about my parents, especially when the UK death toll became the worst in Europe. So here the respondent is, while being worried, is also clearly expressing discontent towards the UK government for making the situation worse. Here's another story from a woman born in Greece and living again in Finland. I moved to Finland from Greece 10 years ago. My parents are in the high-risk group for this virus, and they are the primary caretakers for my 95-year-old grandmother. My mother, who is 65, has been battling with lung issues, and my father, 75, has had other illnesses in the past. Being so far away has caused me a lot of stress. I cannot be there to help them with day-to-day or even make sure that they are being careful during this time. Moreover, I am not able to travel to visit them, and I do not expect I will be able to visit them anytime soon. Then traveling to visit them would mean I need to quarantine in a hotel for 14 days before visiting them at their home. And having a job in Finland does not allow such luxury of time, even if flights would be available again. I have now accepted that I can only visit them after a vaccine or medicine for this virus is created. So again, worried and stressed about the situation, but also naming other obstacles for not being able to do what one would see important to do, that is going to visit one's parents. So this time the respondent is mentioning that having a job makes it impossible to visit her parents. And I would say that this is one thing that perhaps has not received much media attention, at least in Finland, that people were a lot focusing on the kind of the more kind of limited, in a limited sense, to the travel restrictions and whether people are allowed to travel or not, but the question of whether people would practically be able to travel because of the need to self-quarantine, for instance, and still trying to work at the same time. These questions, I would say, that have not received much attention in Finland. So people were naming other actors and obstacles, but I would say that recognizing and naming other actors and obstacles in the situation did not necessarily alleviate the sense of personal responsibility in these stories. And clearly people had hard time to imagine or name other actors who would be responsible for caring their relatives. So people were naming actors like governments who are responsible for trying to limit the virus outbreak, but if something, for instance, that is not related to the virus happens to their parents, then people had already more difficulties in seeing how there would be other actors or people who would be responsible for taking care of their parents. And this is, even though we in our call we directly ask people to think who should help, who should be helping their parents if something happens. So to kind of maybe simplify this a bit, obviously, but in a sense, the answer that most people gave to this question was that they said that they should themselves be the one who should help their parents. So one conclusion that we can draw from this is that there have been discussions in media and also in academic circles about how this COVID pandemic might have helped us to see the value of care and might have helped us to understand how we are all vulnerable and how the functioning of society requires that we care for each other. And this perhaps is one dimension of the picture, but it has, based on this data, we can say that this idea that this pandemic would have highlighted our kind of the way we value and understand the value of mutual and collective care. It is not self-evident, maybe, because at least during last spring, when we collected this data, people were really much concentrating on their personal responsibilities and personal care towards their relatives, and had really trouble seeing how there would be other people who might be able to help in this situation. Then my second kind of line of observations relates to what sociologists have called feeling rules. Feeling rules is a classic concept that refers to the kind of norms that every society has for the appropriate emotional reactions that we can have to given situation. That the question of how one should feel and react when something happens. Like if I hear a sad story and I don't react by expressing empathy, but I react in a strange way, then I may need to explain why I did that, or the other way around. If I hear a funny joke and start crying, then I may again have to explain why my emotional reactions are not in line with what is happening and taking place. And when I was reading these stories, I noted that some of the respondents seem to be kind of explaining their feelings in the stories and trying to kind of, also I would say that perhaps trying to explain to us researchers, but also maybe to themselves why they are having the feelings that they are having. Also, I already in those extracts that I showed you earlier, people were giving these kind of nuanced descriptions of the situation in the sense that they were not saying that they are worried about their parents because the parents are, for instance, over 65 years old or because they are old or older, but they were often adding these descriptions about how their parents have some medical conditions, or they otherwise belong to risk groups, or if their parents were living alone, then that was often in these stories giving us a reason for being stressed out about the situation. Also, if one was the only child in the family, that also seemed to work like an explanation for the emotional trouble that people were having. But then there were stories where people kind of seemed to have difficulties in explaining the feelings that they were experiencing. And this is from a woman who was born in Iran and living in Finland. Dear researcher, I hope this story will be easy to read and useful for you, otherwise it will be out of boredom. This is the 5th year I have been away from my family who are living in Iran. After all waiting this year I had the opportunity to visit my mom, but due to the coronavirus I have lost this chance. She is, or better to say, she was an active, outgoing, sociable and popular person. She never had a single time wasted and spending her time with swimming 4 times a week, visiting friends and participating in groups and clubs like politics, social discussion, traveling around the country, simple mountain climbing and charities. This thought that we are not able to reach to each other in any emergency cases or cannot visit maybe for another year or more makes both of us feel sad and desperate inside. Well, maybe my story is not an attractive or noteworthy story about an over 65 years old living alone in quarantine far from her children due to her strong character, but still sudden changes always affect on a people's life, and it will show its consequences in the future. So still I'm not really sure how to make sense of these stories and what they are about, but somehow I get the feeling that in this story, for instance, when the writer is describing her mother as an active person and a person with a strong character, it almost seems like someone would maybe almost as if she is writing to audience that might think that when the mother is active and strong character, there is no reason or maybe no right to feel sad and desperate inside. So when I was reading these stories, I felt that people were kind of really particularly and really kind of subtly explaining and managing their stories, in the sense that when they were telling about how they are worried or stressed out, they were also trying to kind of manage the situation manage the story so that they wouldn't appear as too stressed out if the situation didn't look like it was it involved reasons to be stressed out, and that people were explaining why they were stressed out if they were or worried or anxious about the situation. And for instance, in this story, it seems interesting that the person is describing her mother living in a situation of isolation, and one might think that one might be concerned about mental health of the mother, but it seems from this data it seems that at least during the spring 2020 it was not clear that isolation as such was in these stories was seen as a reason for being really anxious about the situation. Like if the parents had like a medical conditions, or if they were in a risk of getting infected, then that was somehow a reason for being worried that was instantly understandable, and that did not require any further explanations. But if people were worried about their parents living in isolation and living and if they were worried about their parents or grandparents' mental health, then it seemed to kind of require more justification and more explanations. But this is like an early observation, and we need to think about this more carefully. But it seems that there are these feeling rules that are related to corona, that you are kind of you have the right to be worried, but you also need to make sure that you are not overly worried, because then other people might think that you are overreacting and you are worried without good reasons for being worried, and so on. There were also stories that explicitly stated that I really don't know how I should react in the situation, and not only that I don't know how I am feeling, or I don't know how I should describe my feelings, but actually I don't know how I should react in the situation. So implying that there are kind of like some appropriate ways to react in the situation, but you need to kind of figure it out or find it out. And here I should maybe highlight that I'm not saying here that everyone somehow should be or should have been super anxious about the situation. What I'm merely saying is that if one has been really anxious about the situation, like it seems like the previous narrator has been anxious about the situation, then if one is anxious, then one should be able to talk about it and tell about one's feelings to others without fearing that the story is not attractive or somehow not noteworthy enough, because there might, according to some other person, there might not be enough reasons for being worried. But this requires more thinking. The third observation that comes out and that I would like to take up relates to the kind of continues from what I was saying, but to a little bit different direction, and relates to the kind of moral and ethical dilemmas that people were experiencing and trying to make sense of in these stories. Moral dilemma simply refers to a situation where there are two or more values or principles that are somehow all valid, but that are conflicting and difficult to follow simultaneously. For instance, one might say that it is important to stay at home, but then again it's also important to meet people, sometimes even face to face, in order to take care of your mental well-being. Also, one might say that it is important to protect people sometimes by controlling themselves, like controlling people, for instance, by implementing lockdowns. But then again, one might say that it is also important to respect the autonomy of people and respect their ability to make informed decisions and use their own reason and so on. And these are kind of like moral dilemmas and ethical dilemmas that many governments have had to deal with during this pandemic. For instance, in Belgium, in last spring there was a full lockdown, whereas in Finland there was is what you might call a semi-lockdown, where people were requested to self-isolate and stay home as much as possible, but also to use their own reason and make their own kind of like conscious decisions over their own actions. And what I would kind of, this is also an early observation, but it kind of seems that especially when people were living in Finland, where people were making these decisions themselves, it looks like also these moral dilemmas that many governments have had to deal with kind of like takes place in the private lives of people, and people need to handle these moral dilemmas themselves and somehow find ways to solve them. And here's one example of how people have faced such dilemmas. And this is actually from a woman who is living in Belgium and who has parents living in Finland. She's a Finnish-born woman currently living in Belgium and parents living in Finland. Both of my parents are 75 years old and at risk because of underlying diseases. They read the news and are fully aware of the limitations associated with the pandemic. They don't think of themselves as old, that is, as members of the risk group over 70 or sick, nor will they come to think of the risks involved in moving in public places. If you shop a little, it's not a risk, or if there aren't a lot of people in the store, it's not a risk. They have not changed their ways of life much, even if there is a reason. My own range of emotions as they follow their daily lives is huge, ranging from being frustrated to angry. I am sad and anxious because I know that if something happened to them, I can't go to Finland, and on the other hand, if something happens to me, they won't get here. If I take this up, my mother turns it the other way around and tries to comfort me and often states that, don't worry now, the risk isn't that big. This doesn't really make me feel better, on the contrary. My own role is to remind them about the restrictions and things that are unnecessary risks or otherwise unnecessary. I try not to lecture. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. So here's an example of a case where what happens when people need to solve these dilemmas in their own lives. In this case, there is also this dilemma that this respondent is having regarding not trying to respect one's parents' autonomy, and then at the same time trying to give them instructions or guidance, and trying not to lecture, but still trying to somehow guide their choices. So this is, I guess, something that this kind of shows what it can create and engender in families when people have to find their private solutions to these issues. Okay. Then the second study that we are conducting deals with the stories that we received from persons who were aged 65 or over during last spring. And in this call for stories, we were particularly interested to know more about how people aged 65 and over had experienced the pandemic, how the measures taken to confine it, as well as the public and private, how they have experienced the pandemic, the measures taken to confine it, as well as the public and private discussions regarding the virus. So this is how we invited people to write to us. We also invited them to write about how they felt about the virus outbreak, the ways it had affected their day-to-day lives, how they felt about the request to stay at home as much as possible, how they had followed this request, and whether they had needed any help from other people and whether they had received such help. We received altogether 14 stories from people aged from 64 to 82. Again, a lot of stories from the UK and also from other countries, and again also from people born in Finland and living in Belgium at the time of writing. The kind of first and not only first, but in a sense the really overwhelmingly kind of the observation that you can't avoid if you are reading these texts is that how much they talk about the kind of strength and resilience and stamina that people have practiced during the first outbreak of the virus. This is from a woman living in Finland, born in US, aged 70, from 72 to 79. I followed the request to stay home very closely, but I am amazed at how many people ignore it, especially at grocery markets where people push and brush by, and also crowds of young people gathering in parks. I haven't really felt alone, as I have WhatsApp and Zoom conversations and meetings several times a week, as well as regular phone calls. I also meet my son and granddaughter in the forest for games and hikes together. They have also been isolated for 5 to 6 weeks, so that our bubble can contain their family and me. We live very close to each other's. I am not particularly worried about getting help if I need it, although now I need a dentist, but dare not to call, as it may not be considered an emergency. I try to avoid the news and just peek at Yle News website every few days, or the THL website. We don't talk much about it with my family. I believe it is what it is, and if we are diligent with the regulations and our own hygiene, then we will see this through. And another story from a woman living in Finland, born in UK, about same age as the previous respondent. I tried to count my blessings. However, there is a big hole. In 2015, I lost the love of my life. Somehow this crisis, the lockdown, the restrictions, being in a so-called vulnerable group have exacerbated the sense of despair and of being alone. But I try to count my blessings. This is what matters to me most. I don't worry unduly about the coronavirus, but of course I take precautions. I do worry about family and friends in the UK. Being the age she is, years old, I'm classified as vulnerable, but I am not on heart medication. I am not overweight, and I'm relatively fit, both physically and mentally. I made the conscious decision to continue to do my own shopping, and so far I have avoided busy periods. As for moving around, I either walk or use my own car. My aim is to walk on average 5 kilometers a day. Sometimes it's more, sometimes less. And again, I try to avoid busy areas. Time passes quickly. I keep in touch with relatives and close friends by phone, email, and via various chatting channels. And I know there are people who care about me. As for the future, I take it as it comes. So all of these stories, they show remarkable mental strength, stamina, and resilience. People are trying to find ways to manage through the situation, taking care of their mental health, but also physical health, and just trying to see it through. And one might say that these stories present a strong argument against the kind of ageist attitudes and opinions that have sometimes been presented in public, also during the recent years. This is a citation from a recent comment from American gerontologist saying that ageism is the implicit bias that older adults are less resilient and less capable to adapt to challenging events such as COVID-19. Older adults have shown remarkable agency in this crisis, as witnessed by their willingness to engage in positive public health practices such as social isolation, shelter at home, and basic hand washing. Older adults have engaged in meaningful social connection through email, social media, and other forms of electronic communication. So this is pretty much the same story that these narratives that we received also tell. But then, although this is of course in some ways really relieving and positive message that we get from here, one also wonders whether all older people have had the same abilities, for instance, to use the new communication technologies. For instance, we collected this data via social media channels, so this is really in that sense it's a selective sample. That's something that we need to keep in mind. Also, one may think of whether, because of these ageist opinions that are circulating in public, but it might also make it very difficult for people to write about their trouble if they find it difficult to manage, or find it difficult to manage through the self-isolation. Then it might be something that it is difficult to talk about or write about, since it's something that the environment is expecting you to do, and also if the environment or the society is kind of stigmatizing people who are not able to do it, then stepping up and saying that I have these difficulties can be really difficult. And also there have been some comments about how at least during last spring the public discussions and the media discussions were kind of highlighting the importance of staying positive during the situation. So it may be that if the norm is that you should stay positive and not, for instance, not too much worry about the situation, then in this context it might be maybe difficult to write about things that are not positive. So it might be that we also received really positive stories because of this societal norm of that invited people to mainly express positive feelings. But this is also very early stage of the study, and if you have other thoughts about these extracts and these stories, I'm really happy to hear about them. So this is what I had in my mind today, and I want to thank Finnish-British for arranging this situation, and thank you all for your patience in listening to this talk. And here you can find some links through which you are able to see what else we are doing in the Center of Excellence for research on aging and care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antero. I think that it was most interesting, and I think that all of us here, we're only a handful here present, by the way, because of the pandemic, but we're all in between two cultures, and we can so associate with these, even though we're a different age group. But for example, I have family, I have children who are studying abroad, and then it goes also to the cautiousness and the ability to guide goes towards the younger generations as well, not only towards the older generation. So this is extremely appreciated that you're studying this, and we're happy to help you going forward as well. So
thank you.
Thank you, Antero.
Thank you. May we ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. So again, thank you for a very, well, I think it's a very interesting topic, but also extremely complicated.
Yes.
Yes. So one of the things that I was thinking is that there are a huge amount of comparisons that can be made. So I think it's just too complicated, but I ask it in a way, and then maybe you can elaborate. So even in the comparisons, you have some data from Finland and Belgium. You also have collected data from migrants. But have you heard from, for example, on the other side, from the native population? Then have you done any evaluations between those who are native English speakers versus those who are non-native but English speakers, and then English versus non-English speaking migrants? And then, of course, you showed between under 65 and over 65. I mean, that's just too complicated, but what I'm really asking is how, compared to everyone, say, even if you take a simple example, what's the difference, what do you know if there's a difference, say, between the general situation in Finland and the situation among the migrants in Finland, for example? So.
A really good question, and it's really difficult to give a definite answer to that. And of course, well, the easy answer is to say that yes and no. There are different. There are probably a lot of similarities in the sense that these, for instance, I'm not saying that these feeling rules or moral dilemmas that I have described here, or the sense of personal responsibility, for instance, that they would be somehow specific to migrants. I don't mean that at all. I think that they are something that in a way or another all people have had to kind of face during these times. The question of whether my emotions in these situations are appropriate regarding how people should feel about in this situation, whether I am worried enough or whether I am too worried, or whether if I'm underreacting or if I'm overreacting in the situation. I think these are kind of things that somehow touch many people and have no, I'm not saying that these are somehow migrant-specific issues at all. Then questions about these transnational family arrangements. That's also what it's like a more, like you implied, it's more complex than one might think, because also inside one country people can live far away from each other. So there's the question of how is that so different that if my parents live in Rovaniemi and I live in Helsinki, that how is it so different that I cannot perhaps take care of my parents because they are living so far away and I I couldn't go there because of having a job in Helsinki or something like that. And I think that I would say that it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be that different, and people are perhaps going through similar like emotions and experiences. But one thing that may be different, besides these like actual, like if someone lives in the other corner of the planet, then it's of course like a different thing. But also we tend to have this kind of like idea that in our kind of common imagination or common sense, that when people move abroad, they kind of make a kind of conscious decision to move abroad. And if you move from Finland to UK, you kind of like make the decision that you have kind of like moved, and people might tell you that you have moved away from your relatives and you live away from your relatives and you have made the decision. And this is I think that in our stories, this is kind of the perspective from which these people are telling their stories, that they are kind of struggling with the like personal responsibility of making that decision. And I'm sure if people who are moving within one country think about their moving necessarily the same way. Like if people move from a small town in Finland to study in Helsinki, it's something like it doesn't like you don't need to explain that. But if you move from a small town in Finland to the US, then it's all of a sudden it's a situation where you need to kind of explain your close relatives and family members why you have made this decision. And I think this is the thing that these people are struggling, that they are somehow accountable for their decision. And I'm not saying that they should be, and what I tried to perhaps maybe I didn't manage to formulate my thoughts very clearly, but I was saying that I don't think that it's like that different, the situation, that people move around like for various of reasons, but for some reason there is this like cultural idea that if you move from a country to another, then it's more of like a decision and choice, whereas compared to a situation where you move within one country. So I think that's perhaps one kind of like a emotional and kind of moral question that these people are struggling. And I can't say, I don't have any evidence that I could show you comparative data from Finnish people, for instance, who live far away. As long as you can live far away each other's in Finland, I guess you can. But I don't. Maybe it is similar. But this is my kind of guess that there might be differences in this regard. This personal responsibility that these people seem to struggle in these narratives with is maybe something.
I have a question that's very specific that I noticed in one of the pages where you mentioned where the countries where your respondents were coming from, that you mentioned Rhodesia, and I was wondering, is that something that they self-identified, or is that you chose to use the word Rhodesia? Because typically Rhodesia was an unrecognised country in Africa, and only between like mid-60s to the late 70s, and it's modern day, the equivalent of modern day Zimbabwe. So I'm really curious that what was the kind of thinking behind that terminology?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good point. It was the person self-identified.
Yes. Okay, I thought that might be the case. I was just curious to know that if it's
it's a good point, and I should clarify that.
Yeah, maybe, or just put in brackets.
Yes.
Modern Zimbabwe or something, because I'm just thinking a lot of people won't know where that is without checking if they're, especially if they're younger. I think because it's such a niche short period kind of recognised country back then. So,
yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Very good point. Thank you.
And one other question that I thought was interesting, just when you began, you mentioned that the migrants in Finland are aging. Did you mean that the proportion of the migrants who are older compared to younger in Finland is increasing, or do you mean that migrants who came to Finland when they were young and now getting old. That Finland is now getting a demographic of older migrants which wasn't there before.
I think the latter is correct. I'm not I should know this better, but I can't give you a very kind of exact answer to that question. But my understanding about the situation is that it's not that. But it's also simply because Finland also did not have such a large population of migrants compared to other European countries some years or decade or two ago. Then now when the Finnish population is in that sense changing, then you can see the thing is that there are no because Finland has not the migrant population in Finland, because it has not been that large, then also the older migrant population has been really small in Finland compared to other countries that have traditionally had more migrants. So now change in Finland is more dramatic than in other countries.
Good. If there are no further questions, perhaps I can give you a little gift.
Oh.
A speaker gift. It's still tipaton tammikuu, so this is, even though it says cheers, it's tipaton, and a little bit of vegan and gluten-free chocolate. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.